Welcome everybody. I would say that the beers are from the previous talk, so I can't claim those, but yeah, enjoy them anyway. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about incredible Agile Teams this afternoon. So, can anybody actually think of an incredible Agile team? Yeah, it's hard to think of an incredible Agile team, isn't it? It doesn't usually appear in the media. You don't suddenly see on the front page of the Times, this is an incredible Agile team. So, instead, I'd like you to try and think about your current team at the moment and think perhaps what football team they might be like. Because we know football teams, we know what they're like, we know how they behave. So, can anybody think of a football team which their current team's like? Any thoughts? Shout out. I appreciate football isn't everybody's top game. We've only got a couple of slides of football and then we'll go back more to Agile. Okay, and why is your team like Barcelona?
We've got two Iranians on the team for some reason.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for contributing. I was kind of thinking a little bit in terms of the style of which the team behaves. You know, do you? Maybe we'll go on to the next slide. Yeah, I mean, for example, do you have a team which is like Portugal, where you have a real star player, but perhaps they have a bit of an ego? Anybody like that? Yeah. Okay, cool. Do you have a team like Germany, where everybody's really well trained and they'll fight really hard? And yeah, does that resonate with anybody? Okay, one there. Okay. Iceland, yeah, maybe a team where they've gone beyond people's expectations. You know, maybe it was a new team, they didn't have a lot of experience, but they've just worked incredibly well together and just achieved a vast amount. Anybody like that? Yeah, one couple there. And England. Yeah. Yeah, okay. We won't go there. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, different teams have different characters. It isn't necessarily one's necessarily better than the other, but the characteristics of a team have a significant impact on how that team behaves and performs. And the question is which team would you like to be like? You know, if you wanted your Agile team to be like a football team, would you want them to be a bit more like Iceland and really work together incredibly well, or would you like to have a superstar in your team? I mean, it's one that maybe you can go back and discuss as when you get back into the office again. Now, this is the last football slide. When you have a game of football, it's very clear who wins, who loses, who's at the top of the league. You've got wins and you've got goals, and that's basically it. Now we have agile goals as well, but that's another story. If you're looking at an agile team, and it so happens that within Siemens Healthcare, just on the medical imaging side, we've got 30 plus scrum teams. So we could have a league. We don't. But it's much harder to tell which of those teams is doing better than another team. You could have metrics. There's a whole bunch of metrics one could use. You could look at things like velocity, quality, all sorts of things like that. But I don't think that's really necessarily a very good way of looking at things, because in my experience, metrics are good for giving a team insight into how they're doing, but they're bad in terms of actually trying to create a great team. Has anybody here ever had a team member come up to you and say, "So pleased to be part of this team, our metrics are so great"? No, it's not like that. What makes a team great and what makes people want to be part of a team and excel in a team are things that are a little bit deeper than metrics. And those are some of the things we're going to go through today. So the next question is, what characterises an incredible Agile team? And I'm going to go through some of what we've found within Siemens Healthcare. But first of all, I'd like you to have a think yourselves, because you're going to have a whole bunch of good ideas about what characterises a really incredible team. And what I'd like to do is capture that and included in the slides afterwards. So if you can have a think about what is the characteristic for you that makes the most incredible team possible. Feel free to either do it individually or discuss. Fortunately, there's already post-it notes out. I was going to distribute them, but the previous group have already done it, which is great. So if you can just take a minute or two, you can discuss with the person next to you if you want to. And what we'll do at the end of the session is we'll stick them up and I'll photo them and I'll distribute them with the slides as well. So just a couple of minutes on that. It'd be really interesting to sort of make this a whole day thing, but we can't, so we'll stop it there. There's two things that I want you to do with the post-it notes. One is, if there's a characteristic that I'm talking about that was relevant for my team, that is also on your notes, feel free to wave it in the air. It just means we've got an idea of whether we're all on the same page or not, or whether we're coming up with different ideas. And then the other thing is, at the end of the session, if you can stick your post-it notes on those vertical tables on the side, that'd be fantastic. The ones that are just down here. And then we'll capture some of the group information, which will be great. Okay, so let's move it along. So I am, well, I'm based there, except I can't hold the laser pointer sufficiently steady. So I've got a scrum team that works in Oxford in England, and we work with about sort of 10 to 15 teams in Europe, mainly in Germany, but also Slovakia, and then another whole bunch down here in Bangalore, probably about another 20 or so down in Bangalore in India. So, and the characteristics I'm going to be talking about in this session from the perspective primarily from my team in Oxford, but in the context of working with all these other teams. I have also asked a whole bunch of other teams as well from both India and Germany got their input as well, so here and there I may sort of refer back to that explicitly. I would say what I'm presenting is my experience over 4 years. It's not intended to be an academic treatise. There are all sorts of books and papers and things out there which describe how teams form and how teams work. I'm not going to try and be academic here. This is my experience. This is what's worked for my team. So the first characteristic is balance. Now, first of all, I would note that these aren't actually my team. My team are a little bit older than this. But I didn't have any pictures of my team balancing on a seesaw, whereas I did have with my kids and nieces and nephews. So, what we're talking about here is how a team functions. Now, I'm assuming that you've all got cross-functional teams? Yeah? Yeah, cool, good. What I've found is that sometimes those teams, those functions aren't necessarily in balance. So, to illustrate this, when I first joined Siemens back in 2012, the architects were a very, very powerful group within our organisation, and that was actually constraining what our team could do. There were things that we wanted to deliver to the customers, but they were being vetoed by the architects, potentially for good reason. But it created a tension in the team. It was difficult to get things done. The developers weren't allowed to refactor without having to talk to the architects first and the like. And it was a difficult situation. So we needed to kind of work around that to end up with the team functioning better. Another example a little bit later was we had a product owner who was becoming more senior in the organisation, and so he had less and less time for the team. And this impact, again, the lack of availability of the product owner impacted how the team was operating. Third example is perhaps a more positive one, in that about 18 months ago, we had the opportunity to bring a really experienced test lead into the team. And now I always thought our test function was working pretty well. But when this test lead joined, she made such a difference to our team. It was astonishing. We suddenly realised what it meant to have developers and testers really working well together. And what we have now is we have the situation where a couple of developers might be working on a tricky defect, and they'll say, let's go and talk to test. They'll have really good ideas about how we can, about cases we may have missed, and ways that we should explore this before we get too far into it. And there's this really deep respect and trust between. And now, if I was doing this picture with my team, you could have development and test sitting in the middle next to each other, because they just, there's that deep trust between them now. So the challenge here is to, and I will come up with lots of challenges through this talk, but the challenge for you is to step away a little bit from your team and have a think about which functions are strong, which functions are weak, and maybe how you can help those functions to the weaker ones to be more proactive within your team and contribute more. Some of this might be strategic. This isn't a quick fix session. This is something like you might say, maybe our test's a little bit weak. There's a really good tester in that group over there. Maybe in 6 months' time, we could bring them into our group for a while or something. It's trying to plan those things out. Okay. So that was team balance. Now, certainly within Siemens, I'm sure within a lot of other companies as well, your Scrum teams aren't working in isolation. You want your team to work as well as possible with each other, but you've also got connectivity to the wider organisation as well. And a couple of years ago, we had a situation where we were working with one of the Bangalore teams, not a team that we had particularly worked very much with before. They worked on the medical platform rather than on the particular application we were on. But we needed to do some work with them. But we didn't know who they were. If we Googled them, we'd probably just come up with this picture. But we didn't know who they were. And I don't know whether you found this in your own sort of situations, but if you're communicating with a remote team and you don't know each other, and you're just sending emails, you've got two busy groups and they just start winding each other up because the expectations are different. And people get fraught and people get upset with each other. But what happened was that one of my developers who was involved in getting upset with them, rather than just getting stroppy about it, had a really good idea. He said, well, why don't we can't all fly over there because the budget won't stretch to that. We can't fly 11 people over to India, which would be good. But it'd be really good to get to know them better. So let's set up a webinar. The natural thing to do would have been to set up a webinar with some senior management and start complaining about the fact that they weren't doing what we wanted them to do. But he didn't do that. What he said was, let's get to know them better. So he set up a webinar where we weren't talking about work at all. We're just getting it as an opportunity just to introduce everybody from one team to everybody on the other team. So rather than just being this sort of blankness that we knew nothing about, we found they were real people. They were nice people. They were professional. They wanted to get things done. And then we started to get to know them better. We started working better with them. We started delivering more. So, and that's carried on even through to this year. I mean, we've actually done a surprisingly large amount of work with this team. There's some very difficult stuff we're trying to get out at short notice, just over the sort of April, May time this year. And because we've built that level of trust with that team, we managed to work together, communicate well, and get it done. So the challenge on this slide, there isn't a challenge on every slide, but there is on this one again. Identify who's external to your current team that really matters, that you really need to work with, and figure out how you can invest in that to make it work. I mean, with this team, I've been over to India, I've visited them, I've done handwritten notes of appreciation, which I've sent to them. It's just different ways to try and make the teams respect each other and trust each other and work well together. This one is kind of similar in a way. On the particular medical application I work on, we've got 4 Scrum teams. 1 Scrum team in Oxford, 3 in India. And again, we wanted to try and ensure there was a really high level of trust and also sharing of best practice between those teams. And what we found worked well, it kind of happened a little bit like by luck to start. A lot of this we've kind of discovered en route. It's not that we're a perfect team, this is just things we've discovered which have helped us. But what we found is if you take one person from one of these teams and embed them in another team for maybe somewhere between 2 and 6 months, then that's really good because you learn about each other, but you don't actually disrupt the teams themselves. So that if you just swap one person, you've still got the team identity. And then the other thing is that after that time, they go back to their original team again. And when they go back, they take some of the culture from the original team, and you get that exchange going on. And it's very, very powerful. And you also have that really good connection between the teams as well. Because, I mean, as I say, Errol here was over with us for 6 months, as it turned out. Came back to this team again. If Errol then contacts us and says, we need such and such, we drop in everything, we do it for him because we just know him so well. We know he's not going to abuse the relationship. And there's just that really, really high level of trust. I've also heard this done. I run the Agile Oxfordshire group, and there are other companies there as well that also take this approach. So yeah, I can recommend it. This one's an anti-pattern, hence the nice big red cross. This is one that we tried. It seemed like a good idea. We had a bunch of work to do. It was going to take quite a long time. We wanted to do 2 things at the same time. So we kind of split it between, so we had a couple of people on the team working on this, another group working on that, and they were just sort of working in parallel. The downside of this is that you don't actually feel like a Scrum team anymore. You feel like 3 Scrum teams, or 2 or 3 Scrum teams, which are all being shoved into the same room in the same meetings. And it just doesn't work. You find people getting disconnected from each other. They get bored when other people are talking. It's dysfunctional, and the team didn't like it. After a period of time of doing this, they actually said, this isn't working. The other problem is it's difficult to scale as well, because you've only got these 2 people that understand this. If you suddenly want to go faster, you can't, because you've got to spend another month or so bringing these people up to speed. So, although it gives the illusion of progress on a lot of things, it's actually, in our experience, it's not a good way of working. And more recently, we were in the same situation of having a bunch of different features which were all really important for the business that we did. But we said, as a team, we're not going to go for this approach. It works less well. And after a bit of argument, the business agreed with us and they allowed us to do it our way. And it actually meant that we worked really well as a whole team on one feature at a time. And what actually happened was that the business priority changed through the year, as it does. And the whole team moved from one feature to another feature in time to get that second feature then completely out and delivered earlier than originally planned. So I've seen real benefits from having the team focus in that way and not try and do everything for everybody. Because you make people happy in the short term, but in my experience it works less well in the long term. Okay. Moving on to pressure. Now, this has always been true in software development ever since I've been doing it, which is a long time now. You start off with a piece of work. Once you understand what it really is, it's quite a bit bigger. Yep. And then you find somebody from your team's been moved off, and then you find that there's other important work that needs doing as well. This is a very natural cycle of software development. You're kind of okay in Agile if, when you get to this kind of point here, you've got scope which can be removed. If you've got that, life's good, life's happy. What's not good is if your whole backlog is actually a small elephant. You have to have been to the previous talk, one before last, to fully get that. If you weren't at that talk, substitute small elephant with MVP, and then hope minimum viable product, and then we'll be on the same page. But if you've got nothing that you can cut out and still deliver something successfully to your company, to your business, then you're in a problem. And it's really important that whether you're a Scrum Master, a developer, tester, or whatever, that if you think that you're doing that you raise your hand and say really early on. Because it's no good waiting until you're 4 or 5 months through the project and then saying, well, I knew that at the start, but I thought everybody else knew and I was too shy to say. So if you're overcommitting, you're going to cause all sorts of problems. You'll start your quality will go down, you'll start introducing technical debt into the system, people will burn out, you don't have time to learn, you don't have time to do the right thing. It's on the product that we're currently working on, we're still dealing with technical debt issues that were created 5 to 7 years ago by people working under extreme pressure. It has a really long-term impact, so don't do it. Okay? This is related. This is all about being brave. Which is another one of the XP principles, which is fine. I mean, I'm not saying these things are new. I'm saying these are things which have helped up my team. Are we building the right thing? You can write the perfect code. You can have the best test team ever. You can have automated tests. You can do continuous delivery. You can do anything you like. But if you're not building what the customer actually wants, you just wasted your time and the company's money. And it's just a bad place. So the thing here is, it's not just the product owner's responsibility to build the right thing. It's everybody's responsibility on the team. And this is kind of where, on my team, we went wrong a couple of years ago. There was a piece of functionality which was, the product owners were arguing a bit about what it should do, and we came up with something that was requested which nobody really understood very well. We questioned it once or twice, but they said it's what they wanted, so as a Scrum team we built it. But it wasn't the right thing. It confused our customers, and in the end we've had to go back and do a lot of rework as a result of that. And what we've learned from this is that as a team, we should have taken responsibility. Even though these were quite senior people in our organisation, we should have been brave, put our hand up, and it would have been better for the business if we'd done that. So have the courage of your convictions, and if you think you're not building the right thing, shout, again, whoever you are. Are we taking on too much? That's coming back to the pressure slide. Are we reducing technical debt? This is something that I tend to discuss with the team on a fairly regular basis. We also use sonar metrics and the like. We're actually making progress on this front, so this is something which, is going reasonably well. But again, if you think you're not, sometimes it's easy within a team just to focus on what management are shouting about. But if you're going to be a really great team, you have to take a slightly wider responsibility and be responsible for the longer term success as well. And the last one is, are we sharing knowledge? I mean, there's lots of things to be brave about, but these are 4 that I've picked out. I mean, we discussed this within our team, and we found that we were quite good at sharing knowledge within the team, but we were much less good at sharing knowledge across teams. And that was something we identified, and then we've tried to address. We've tried to do more knowledge exchange on a wider basis. I think of sharing technical knowledge a bit like people technical debt. If you don't share it, then you're just incurring long-term risk, and to the extent that if then one person leaves, you've got nobody else who can take it up. So by doing that investment, you're actually sort of paring down that debt and making yourselves much more resilient. Which takes me nicely onto this one. So, yeah, this isn't my car, by the way. It'd be nice if it was, but when you think about a high-performing team, it's tempting to think about something like this. Really high velocity, beautifully engineered, yeah. But in my experience, projects are more like this. And you don't want to be driving a Porsche through this stuff. I think you'd be struggling. So what you really need is you want your team to be as resilient as possible to be successful. If you've got a team which has got lots and lots of single points of failure because everybody's optimized to the end, you've got one DBA who's brilliant at that and absolutely nobody else can cover. In reality, you're stuffed because he will be away at the critical point when you need him. So you really need to be focusing on these kind of things in your team in order to be successful. Team rotation we've discussed. Pair programming is great because that shares knowledge. It also makes more readable code as well. And in fact, pair programming even increases your speed in the short term, because what I've found is that people start off pairing, somebody goes ill, something happens, the one that's left can carry on working, maybe pair with somebody else. Whereas before we did pair programming, that piece of functionality would just stop being developed for 5 days, 8 days, or whatever, and anything else that was dependent on that will get slowed down. So, yeah, so pair programming is great to increase resilience. The things like auto tests as well are great. If you've got a really good auto test framework that gives you resilience, you can make changes more easily. So it's not all, most of these slides are people, but there are some technical things in there as well which can help. Don't underestimate networking and willingness to ask for help. This is something you should encourage and nurture in your teams. Quite often, some of the best people in my team are people that have networked and known exactly who knows the answer in 20 other teams throughout the organisation. You have a problem in the stand-up and this guy will say, I know such and such over in Slovakia, he'll know the answer to that. And that is just incredibly valuable in terms of being able to move things along. And then in terms of programming, in terms of recruitment, sorry, what you really want is a can-do attitude. Somebody who's willing to look at any code in any language in any part of the code base, try and figure it out and make progress on that. So when you're recruiting, I would encourage you to look for those kind of people as well, either external recruitment or bringing people internally into the team. So there are things you can do to really try and make your team more resilient. And of course, there's the classics of the bus factor. Have a think about your team. Think about who would be the most painful person if they suddenly went off unwell, or they won the lottery. That's a classic one, isn't it? If they left for some reason, who would be the most painful person to lose? And what can you do to mitigate against that now by maybe having them pair with somebody else, or share that expertise? Next one's respect. Couldn't find a good picture for respect, so I just put up the definition in the end. I can't necessarily take credit for this in my team, but the respect has just gone up enormously over the last 4 years, and it's just something which has made our team work so much better. So anything you can do to nurture respect in your team really does help. We did have a problem relatively early on where we had two people who sat opposite each other, who actually got to the state where they wouldn't talk to each other, they'd only send emails to each other. So I've seen the flip side of this as well. We tried to resolve it. In the end, I moved one of the people off that was causing the problem. And that was one of the best decisions I made. So if you can work around problems on that, do so. If you can't, don't be afraid to actually change your team. It just makes an enormous difference to how a team functions. And one of the really good ways of generating respect is having people working together. You don't realise how much other people know until you actually sit down and work jointly with them. And we've done this in a number of different ways. One is, one of my team had used a pairing board previously, which makes sure that you don't always end up with two friends pairing together. It encourages you to rotate people around so people learn from each other and get different experience. But another thing that we've tried is one of the ideas from this. There's a really good book actually, by the way. If you're looking for ideas to try different things out on your test side, then it's worth reading this. But we picked one idea from this called mob testing. And so we had this quite big chunk of functionality which was going to go out early to our customers, and we wanted to make sure that it was really solid. And we read this book, so our test lead, this was a really good one I was talking about earlier, said, let's give this a go. So what we did was we created a test server, 4 clients on it, and we set it all up, and then we arranged to have developers and testers working together, half-hour slots, trying to break it, trying to do everything they could on this system. And then each half hour we'd rotate people around, so you had a different pair working together. And it was brilliant, because we didn't have developers and testers working in that way very often. And the respect between them went up. We found things that we never would have found in isolation because they bounced different ideas off each other. The testers tended to have a wider knowledge of how the product actually operated in reality. And sometimes the developers had some in-depth knowledge which the testers didn't. But the pairing together just worked really well. So we found a bunch of stuff and we increased respect as well. So yeah, that's a technique I can recommend. But there'll be you have other ways of working together, but it's something that I'd encourage you to do. Learning. It's, again, I don't know why, but learning just makes a real big difference to the culture within a team or an office. And it's something that we've done a lot of at Siemens. Within my own team, we've introduced regular. I know a lot of people probably do this already, but the kind of things we've done is we've introduced informal learning sessions where people can either say, "I really like to learn about this," or they can say, "I've been looking at this. I'd like to give a session on it." And it's just purely informal. Anybody can rock up, and it's anywhere between about 15 minutes and an hour. And maybe once a fortnight, you're just teaching people about different things, whether it's retrospectives or we actually had an opportunity to go and visit the mini factory in Oxford, where they use lean production there on the manufacturing lines, and it was fascinating. So I came back and gave a talk on that. So it's just anything which people might find interesting. But it's not just what they learn; it's engendering this culture of improvement within your teams and your office. If you're not quite sure where to start, this picture here is actually from a lightning talk that we did where I asked people to give a 5-minute book review on a technical book they'd read, and we just had like 6 or 7 people giving these 5-minute slots, and it wasn't too big a commitment for anybody, but it just sort of helped get things going. So if you can create a culture of learning, that can make a real difference to your teams as well. And the final one is morale. Now, morale's a really big one. I mean, you've got Steve McConnell and various other people have talked about it a lot in the past. But you just do everything you can to try and keep morale high in your team. This doesn't mean being artificial. If you look at our team, it's had various points over the last 4 years where it's been very painful. There have been difficult times in the projects. And you can't be all gung-ho and positive in those times. But on the whole, when you do have an opportunity to celebrate as a team, you should do so. Anything you can do to increase morale, you should do. There are some interesting ones here, like software craftsmanship. Developers like being able, everybody likes producing something that's high quality. If you give people the opportunity to do that, it'll increase morale. If you take it away from them by putting them under too much pressure, you reduce morale. So you need to think about a lot of these different things. I've done both distributed development and co-located. The big thing is that eating together is really important as a team. And eating together when you're distributed is much harder. You can only do it when you're visiting each other. So I think for that, if no other reason, I think co-located development is easier from a morale point of view. I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's... Yeah, okay, maybe just do the having fun one. There's one of our teams in India, they actually have somebody who's responsible for fun. which I think is such a great idea. I'm still slightly embarrassed that I haven't introduced this on my team as well yet, but they rotate it around, every couple of sprints. I say, right, who wants to be responsible for fun for the next couple of sprints, and they're responsible for thinking up ideas and doing stuff. And yeah, it's a good idea. So we look for opportunities to increase morale. So these are the characteristics that we pulled out. There will be more. I'm sure there's some on your stickies, which I look forward to sort of reading through later on. But it does kind of make sense, really, because if you think about a team which didn't have these, so you've got a team which is no resilience, if a single person, anybody left, you wouldn't be able to do anything. They don't respect each other. They've got no connectivity with the rest of the organisation. They're cowardly about making decisions. You've got one function which is much stronger than the other and doesn't let anything happen. They don't bother learning anything. They're trying to do everything at once. Morale's down the pan and they're under pressure all the time. Who wants to work for that team? But this is an interesting point. As I was reflecting on some of these characteristics, I realised that a lot of the improvements that we made weren't coming out of retrospectives. Now, retrospectives are important, but it's a bit like Judith was saying earlier, for those that were at her talk. You've got the concept of Kaizen, which is making small incremental improvements. And that's what comes out of your retrospectives. And it's good and it's positive, and you've got this continuous evolution of small gradual improvements. But the things we've got here are a bit more fundamental. They're about things like perhaps changing the composition of your team. They're looking at initiatives to try and share knowledge or connect to other teams in a new way. And that can take many months to happen. So you need to find ways of opening these things up to your team and the wider organisation to discuss. I don't have a brilliant answer for this. I mean, the one thing that we've tried is having focused retrospectives, where rather than just focusing on the last 2 weeks, we pick a topic like who are all the different groups we communicate with, and then dot voting to see which ones we feel like we're struggling with most. So you can kind of do things like that. But however you go about it, I would really recommend that you do spend some time and some quality time with your team, really figuring out how you can improve the characteristics that are important to your team. I'm going to have to move on reasonably quickly. I want to describe a stand. I've got 5 slides left. I want to describe a stand-up very, very briefly. So I'm in the stand-up here. This is the room. There's about 8 or 9 of us in that. It's a slightly sad day because one of our test interns is leaving. So we do the usual stand-up stuff, and then I say, it's been great having Eddie here. Really good guy. Really appreciate everything he's done. He's going off to join this other company in London. It's a great opportunity for him, but we'll miss him. Everything's going as I expect at this point. But then Eddie says, I've really enjoyed working with you, and I've got a present for the team. So we looked at this and we said, wow, thanks Eddie, but why have you given us a rubber chicken? And he said, you have these stand-ups, and sometimes it's difficult to getting everybody into the room, and I thought this would help. Now, you can't really do justice to this with a photograph. So here is the said chicken. So every stand-up in the morning, just when we're getting it going, if people aren't in the room, we do this. And it echoes across the open plan office. And my entire team just leg it into the room. So in fact, if any of the other managers happen to be in the meeting room at the time, in another meeting and do it, then my entire team reflexes sort of start moving off their chairs. But it's but yeah. So and the great thing about that is that every time that happens, my entire team smiles. So we've got a test intern who was leaving our team, and he cared enough about the team to buy us a gift which helped us work better. And I just feel enormously appreciative of being part of a team like that. A few resources. Debugging teams, that's a really good one. Talks about a lot about respect and trust. Notes to a software team leader. it talks a lot about trying to get out of being under too much pressure, moving back to an environment where you can learn again, and also challenging people. That's really good. And then you've got the Google one about where they were looking at statistically what makes their teams most productive, and they found that psychological safety and balance was really important there as well. So some interesting reading there. And just a little bit about the team journey. This is important as well. Now, I'm not saying that I've got the most humongous teams, that would be silly. But what's happened is that over 4 years, people have joined the team and then moved on. So, this guy is now, was one of our key developers. He's now a test architect. This guy's become a senior product manager. He's become a scientist. This was a German test intern who's gone back to Germany again. This is the guy that gave us the chicken, so you should get a round of applause, really. But what I'm trying to say here is that teams aren't a static thing; they do change. So if you can introduce practices which make your team that much better, when these people move on, they will take those practices with them. So if you can introduce something great now, you might be improving another 10 or 20 teams in a couple of years' time. And that's got to be worth investing in, hasn't it? So my challenge to you is how can you make your current team that much more incredible? So go do it. Thank you.